You are sitting at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock at night, with your jaw throbbing like there's a heartbeat trapped inside your own tooth, and you have already taken the pills the bottle says you can take, and you are lying awake doing the math on how many hours until the pharmacy opens, and somewhere in the back of your mind you are thinking, my grandmother never had this trouble, not like this, and you wonder what she knew that you were never taught. Maybe you have tried holding a cold cloth to your cheek, or rinsing with warm salt water, and it took the edge off for a minute, and then came right back, and you are starting to believe there is simply nothing to be done, except wait it out, and pay for it in the morning. I want to tell you something plain before we go any further. That ache you are carrying right now, most nights, does not need a bottle at all, and it does not need you to wait until the sun comes up either. It needs a single clove, held under your tongue, for about 5 minutes, and I am going to tell you exactly why, and exactly how, and exactly what it will and will not do for you, because I have no interest in you finding out the hard way that I oversold you on something. You are about to give up on the best thing you'll ever have in your kitchen cabinet, for want of something nobody taught you. My name is Elias. My people came over from the Palatinate in 1838, up the Susquehanna, and onto the same piece of Lancaster County ground my family has worked ever since, through fever and frost, and every kind of trouble a family can have. And one thing that came with them, folded into the family the same as the Bible and the seed corn, was a knowledge of what grows and what it is good for. My grandfather kept a tin of whole cloves in the barn, not the kitchen, because he used them on the horses' gums as much as his own, and he taught my mother, and my mother taught me, sitting at this same table where I sit and talk to you now. My wife Esther still keeps a jar of them on the sill above the sink, right next to the salt, because in this house, a toothache is not an emergency, it is a Tuesday, and we have never once needed to leave the property to handle it. I did not learn this from a book when I was young, though I have since read enough to know the old folks were not simply guessing. I learned it standing on a stool at my mother's elbow, watching her crack a clove between her back teeth the same way she cracked an egg against the rim of a bowl, without a wasted motion, because she had done it 1,000 times before I ever saw her do it once. Now here is the thing almost everyone has backward, and once you understand it, the whole business makes sense in a way it never did before. Most folks think a toothache is something you have to overpower. They reach for the strongest thing in the medicine chest because they believe pain this size needs to be beaten into submission. But pain in a tooth is not usually the enemy itself. It is a messenger, and what is actually happening down in that nerve is a small, local, electrical kind of signal, firing over and over, telling your brain that something is irritated. You do not need to overpower that signal with a sledgehammer. You need to interrupt it, gently, right at the source, the same way you would put your hand over a doorbell that will not stop ringing. A clove does not fight your pain. It quiets the messenger. That is the whole secret, and once you see it that way, you understand why a little wrinkled brown bud, worth pennies, has been doing this job in farmhouses for 300 years, while folks 2 counties over are driving to the all-night pharmacy for something that cost them $11 to do the very same job, not better, only louder. Once you understand that the goal is quiet, not conquest, you stop looking for the strongest thing on the shelf and start looking for the gentlest thing that actually reaches the nerve, and that single change in thinking is worth more than any bottle you will ever buy. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book at eliasyoder.com. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. Now let me walk you through it, plainly, the way my mother walked me through it, so that you are not just doing what I say, you are understanding what you are doing and why, because a method you understand, you will remember for the rest of your life, and a method you only obey, you will forget by Thursday. First, you want a whole clove, not ground clove powder, from the spice rack, and there is a real reason for that, not fussiness. The oil that does the work, the part called eugenol, sits locked inside the whole bud, and it releases slowly, a little at a time, the longer that bud sits warm and moist against your gum. Ground clove releases everything at once, fast and thin, and it will sting you more and help you less, the same way a whole log burns slow and steady, while sawdust just flares up and is gone. So reach past the powder. Find whole cloves, the little dried buds shaped almost like a tiny nail, which is in fact where the word clove comes from, an old word for nail, because that is exactly what our people thought they looked like. Second, take one whole clove, just one, and place it near the sore tooth, tucked between your cheek and your gum, or held gently under your tongue if the tooth troubling you sits low. You do not chew it, not yet, not hard. You want to bite down on it, softly, just enough to crack the outer skin of the bud, and let a little of that oil begin to weep out. Think of it like cracking an egg, not crushing it. One firm, gentle press with your back teeth, and then let it rest. Third, you leave it be. This is the part where impatience ruins more good remedies than anything else does. 5 minutes, sometimes a little longer, is what it takes for that oil to soak into the gum tissue and reach the nerve that is causing you grief. I have watched folks chew a clove to bits in 30 seconds, spit it out, and declare that it does not work, when the truth is, they never gave it the time to work at all. You are not eating a piece of candy. You are letting a slow medicine do a slow job. Sit still. Breathe through your nose. Let it sit. If your mind wanders to how silly this must look, a grown person sitting at the table with a clove tucked in their cheek, let it wander. My grandfather looked plenty silly doing it too, and it never once stopped him, because he cared more about a quiet night's sleep than he cared about looking dignified while he earned it. Fourth, and this is something my grandfather was strict about with the horses and with us alike, do not swallow the clove, and do not let a child do this without a grown person watching close, because clove oil in any real quantity is strong stuff, strong enough that a whole bottle of pure clove oil, swallowed by a small child, has landed families in the hospital. A single whole clove, held in the mouth, used the old way, is a mild and safe thing that families have used for generations. A bottle of concentrated oil, drunk down like medicine, is not the same thing at all, and I want to be plain with you about that difference, so you never confuse the two. Fifth, once the ache has eased, you can remove the clove, or if you are the sort who does not mind, you can leave a fresh one in for a little while longer through the evening, changing it if the sting fades. Some nights, Esther keeps one tucked in her cheek clear through supper, and never thinks twice about it. And sixth, if you find the taste too strong to sit with on its own, there is no shame in wrapping the cracked clove in a small piece of clean gauze or a bit of cotton before you tuck it against the gum. That was my mother's way when we were small and did not care for the sharpness of it on our tongues. The gauze slows the release a touch and makes it gentler still, which tells you something important about this remedy as a whole. It is not a harsh thing. It was never meant to overwhelm you. It was meant to be lived with, day in and day out, by people who did not have the luxury of driving to town every time a tooth acted up. Now, here is what I owe you, and what most folks selling you something never will. I will not promise you a miracle. I will not tell you this clove will cure a rotten tooth, or fix an abscess, or take the place of a dentist when the trouble is deep in the root or in the bone. A man who promises you a miracle by the calendar is selling you something, and I am not in that business. What I am telling you, plainly, is that for the ordinary ache, the kind that flares up from a sensitive spot, a bit of irritated gum, a tooth that is simply having a bad week, this old method takes the edge off the pain, often within minutes, gently, and without a single side effect worth worrying over, and it does it using something that has sat in kitchen cabinets since before this country had a name. If the pain is sharp, if there is swelling in your face, if you have a fever alongside it, that is your body telling you this is bigger than a clove can handle. And the honest thing, the thing my own mother would tell you, is go and see a dentist, because no home remedy, mine or anyone else's, should ever stand between a person and a real doctor when the trouble runs deep. Let me tell you where people go wrong with this, because I have heard from enough of you over the years to know the mistakes by heart. The first mistake is using too many cloves at once, thinking if one is good, 4 must be 4 times as good. It is not. More clove oil against soft gum tissue does not multiply the relief, it just multiplies the sting, and can leave the gum feeling raw and irritated for a day after, which serves nobody. 1 clove. That is the dose the old folks used, and that is the dose that works. The second mistake is giving up too early. I said this once already, but it bears saying twice, because it is the single biggest reason folks think this remedy does not work, when in fact, they simply never let it finish its job. 5 minutes feels like a long time when your jaw aches. I know that. Sit with it anyway. The third mistake is using old, dried-out cloves that have sat in the back of a cabinet for 3 years and lost most of their oil to time and air. A good whole clove should have some give to it when you press a fingernail into it, and it should smell strong and sharp the moment you crack it open. If your cloves smell like nothing at all, they have gone tired, and a tired clove cannot do a young clove's work. The fourth mistake, and this one is more about the heart than the method, is turning to this only after everything else has failed, and expecting it to somehow work harder because you are more desperate. A remedy does not know how badly you need it. It only knows what it is. Trust it early, the way you would trust a good tool, not only as a last resort when your patience is already spent. There is a fifth mistake too, quieter than the others, and it is the mistake of thinking that because a thing is old and cheap, it must also be careless or half-hearted, so a person rushes through it without the same seriousness they would bring to something bought in a box, with instructions printed on the side. I would ask you to bring that same seriousness here. Wash your hands before you touch anything that is going in your mouth. Use a clean clove from a jar that has been kept sealed, not one that has been sitting open on a windowsill, collecting dust and kitchen air for a year. Small carefulness, carried all the way through, is what separates a remedy that works cleanly from one that only sort of works and leaves you unsure whether you did it right. My mother used to say, a remedy done halfway teaches you nothing except that remedies do not work, when the truth is only that you never gave it the respect it was owed. Now I want to say something to you plainly, and I want you to hear that I am not saying it in anger, because I am not an angry man, and this is not a story about villains. Nobody sat in a back room somewhere and schemed to keep this knowledge from you. I do not believe that, and I would not tell you that, because it is not true, and I promised you plain truth, not a scary story. What happened instead is quieter than that, and in a way, it is worse than a conspiracy, because nobody had to plan it at all. It simply pays better, a great deal better, to sell you a bottle with a bright label and a brand name than it does to tell you about a spice that costs $3 for a jar that will outlast a whole winter of toothaches. Nobody had to conspire for that to happen. It happened on its own, the way water finds the low ground without anybody digging the channel for it. The result is the same either way, though. A cheap, safe, old thing gets quietly pushed off the shelf of common knowledge, not because it stopped working, but because nobody stood to gain much by reminding you it was there. I am reminding you. That is really all this is. So let me pull the whole of it back together for you, plain and simple, the way I would say it to a neighbor over the fence. When a tooth starts aching, you reach not for the strongest thing in the house, but for the gentlest thing that knows how to quiet a nerve, instead of fighting it. You take 1 whole clove, not the ground powder. You press it gently between your back teeth, or hold it under your tongue near the sore spot, just enough to crack it, and let the oil begin to release, and then you leave it be for about 5 minutes, and let it do its slow, patient work. You do not swallow it. You do not let a child handle it alone, and you do not ask it to do a dentist's job if the pain is sharp or swollen or comes with a fever. Used the right way, for the ordinary ache, it takes the edge off the pain gently, using nothing but what our grandparents kept in the pantry, and it has been doing that job quietly in farmhouse kitchens a long time before anybody thought to put pain relief in a bottle with a brand name on it. Now I would love to hear from you, truly, because this channel is not really mine. Not anymore. It belongs as much to the folks writing in from their own kitchens as it does to me and Esther. Tell me where you are writing from. What county, what state, whether your people came from somewhere the way mine came from the Palatinate. Tell me if you already had a jar of whole cloves sitting in your cabinet this whole time without knowing what your own grandmother kept it there for. Tell me what you always thought you were doing wrong when a toothache kept you up at night, and what you reached for instead, and whether it ever really worked the way the label promised. Tell me who taught you the old ways in your own family, a grandmother, an uncle, a neighbor down the road, because I read every single comment, every one, and I mean that plainly, not as a figure of speech, and it is from you, from all of you writing in from every corner of this country, that I learn how wide and how deep these old ways really run. There are more of us keeping this knowledge alive than you would ever guess from how quiet it has gotten, and every comment section under one of these videos is proof of that. A gathering of folks who still believe the old ways deserve remembering. If this was useful to you tonight, tell a friend who has been suffering through toothaches the hard way. That is truly the only advertising a channel like this one needs. Next time, I want to sit with you and talk about something my grandmother used for burns, the small everyday kind you get off a hot pan or a stove coil, because there again, almost everybody reaches first for the wrong thing, and there is an old answer sitting in most kitchens that works faster and gentler than the tube of gel from the drugstore, and I will tell you exactly why it works and exactly how to use it safely, so you are never caught standing at the stove not knowing what to do. And one more thing before I close, because I think it matters more than it sounds like it should. If you found this useful, do not just carry it quietly in your own head and never speak of it again. Tell somebody. Tell your mother. Tell your neighbor. Tell the fellow at work who has been complaining about his tooth all week and reaching for the same bottle everybody reaches for. Knowledge like this only stays alive if it keeps moving from one kitchen table to the next, the same way it moved from my grandfather's hands into mine. A remedy nobody shares is a remedy that quietly dies out in a generation or two, and I do not intend to let that happen to this one, not while I am still able to sit here and tell you about it. I will leave you with this thought, because it is the thing underneath all of it, more than the clove, more than the tooth, more than any single remedy I could ever hand you. The people who built this country with their hands did not have a pharmacy on every corner, and they did not have a bottle of something bright and promising sitting on a shelf waiting to be bought. What they had was each other, and what they had was attention, real close attention, paid to the plants growing around them, and the small things that worked, and the small things that did not, passed down at kitchen tables exactly like this one, from a mother to a daughter, from a grandfather to a boy standing at his knee. That knowledge did not come from a laboratory. It came from love, from people who could not afford to get it wrong, and so they paid attention until they got it right, and then they made sure the next generation would not have to start over from nothing. That is what I am really trying to hand you tonight, more than the clove itself. Not just a fix for an aching tooth, but a small piece of that old attention, that old patience, that old self-reliance our people carried across an ocean and planted in this ground the same as they planted their crops. Every time you reach for something simple and true instead of something loud and expensive, you are keeping a little of that alive, in your own kitchen, for your own family, the same as mine has been kept alive in this one. Table after table, generation after generation, for the better part of 200 years. Take care of that tooth tonight, and take care of each other. That is the whole of it. That is all the old folks ever really wanted us to remember.